Hello, welcome to the Wildline Podcast. I'm your host, Dan. This is a podcast about movies and how much money they make at the box office. So we're going to talk about this past weekend. It is Sunday night when I'm recording this. So the weekend estimates are up. Are they 100% accurate? No, but they're going to be pretty darn close. And I kind of wanted to do the show today instead of doing it tomorrow night when the actuals are in. So here we are. So we'll talk about the estimates, sort of walk through the top 10, touch upon a couple of movies outside the top 10 and limited release, and then try and wrap up the week and talk about what's coming out this next weekend in the next few weeks. So for this weekend, we had two big wide release openers. We had the Hitman's Bodyguard and we had Logan Lucky. I always keep doing that. Why would they call it Logan Lucky and not Lucky Logan? Because Lucky Logan just feels right. It rolls off your tongue, right? Logan Lucky just feels clunky. Speaking of clunky, we'll get to that in a second. So the weekend sort of played out, I think, how people had expected. Last weekend was a pretty big surprise. I had sort of called that the summer is over a couple of weekends ago, and then Annabelle Creation comes out, essentially Annabelle 2, and crushes it. Opened to $35 million last weekend, kind of out of the blue. Like, it didn't really make a lot of sense that it would open that well. Especially because, and there's a few reasons why that was surprising, and I talked about that last week, but I'll touch upon it again as it's sort of coming to my mind right now. The first Annabelle, obviously this is part of the Blumhouse James Wan Conjuring horror universe, which has been very successful. You have the two Conjuring movies, which did very well, both on over 100 million. And then you had the first Annabelle, which came out a couple years ago, in October, I believe, and that opened in the $30 million range. The problem, though, was that the original Annabelle was not received very well after people had watched it. I think going into the movie, there was a lot of hype. People were really excited. I was really excited. I saw it opening weekend. But the reaction to the actual film was sort of muted at best, I think. I think people thought it was going to be a lot better. They thought it was kind of lame. So Annabelle Creation, I think people thought that that negative reaction to Annabelle was going to carry over into this new one. It also didn't seem like it had a huge hook to it. The trailers kind of seemed like creepy little girl. Like, we've seen that done a million times already. So especially you think all the way back to like Ring, which came out, 2002 in America, that version, which was a huge hit. The little girl's creepy thing, hell, it's been going on forever since like even like Poltergeist and stuff. So it seemed a little bit rote, and kind of like maybe a mid-tier or lower tier horror film. But apparently people didn't think that. Apparently people were ready for a horror film, and maybe, I don't know, maybe the timing was just right. You know, I thought that early August would be a little bit more quiet than it has been, but it really popped off with 35 million. And so coming into this weekend with the Hitman's Bodyguard and Logan Lucky coming out, I think my expectations were that they're going to do a little bit better than tracking had suggested. Hitman's Bodyguard, I think, was tracking in the teens, high teens, maybe low 20s, and Logan Lucky was definitely in the low teens. But definitely in double digits. It was not a single digit tracking movie, I do not believe, from my memory here. So I thought those numbers were going to go a little bit higher this weekend. And Hitman's Bodyguard, I think, kind of hit right where they thought it was going to hit. Hitman's Bodyguard was number one this weekend, $21.6 million, on about 3,400 screens. Which, you know, is a big release. It's not a super wide release, but it's certainly not a small wide release. Anything over 3,000 I consider wide. There's actual numbers to this, like industry numbers, but here's in my head how it works. Like, anything over 3,000 is wide. Anything over 4,000 is super wide. Or I forget what the term is. Saturated wide, I believe, is what they say in the biz. In any event, it was on 3,400 screens, which is a pretty good wide release. Its per theater average was about $6,400, which is okay. It's not great. It's certainly not terrible. But for number one movie, this is definitely, as I've been saying, this is the epitome of the doldrums. There's nothing coming out for the next few weeks. Hitman's Bodyguard will probably be number one all the way through Labor Day until it comes out. So I don't know. 21.6 is not amazing, but it's not terrible either. It's not a flop, and it's not really underperforming. It kind of like, if you think about it in baseball terms, it's kind of like hitting a double. It's like a sliding double. Hit a really good strong ball in between outfielders, and he had to slide into second for a double. Like, so it's definitely a good performance. It's not a great performance. They didn't strike out. But I honestly thought this was going to go higher. Like, when this was, when they talked about this on, just looking at it on paper, you have Ryan Reynolds, you have Samuel Jackson, and you kind of have this genre of like the cop movie, kind of like a play off the buddy cop movies from the 80s and 90s, which definitely kind of went away for a while. Like, I'm trying to think of like the biggest, obviously like Lethal Weapon and stuff like that. I think probably the bigger one would have been Rush Hour, Jackie Chan, Chris Tucker. And that was kind of like, that was just a genre that was big. And it came back recently with the 21 Jump Street, 22 Jump Street, with Channing Tatum and Jonah Hill. Very successful films. But those are kind of like, I guess you would call them maybe like a parody of a cop buddy movie. It seemed like a parody. It had that feel. The comedy had that sort of postmodern feel to it. And Hitman's Bodyguard, I think, I haven't seen the movie, but all the marketing suggested it was kind of a little bit meta, a little bit of a satire of the 80s buddy cop movie. And the marketing is fantastic. It just seemed like, especially when that first trailer hit, and actually it wasn't the first trailer, I'm sorry. It was the first poster where they basically took off the Bodyguard, which was the old Whitney Houston, Kevin Costner movie. Huge movie. And I will always be, what was the song? I can't remember now. Like, I want to sing the Whitney Houston line, but I can't remember what it is. Huge movie. So I don't know. It seemed like they were having fun with this movie. It seemed like Ryan Reynolds and Samuel Jackson were just kind of like hamming it up and having a good time. And that usually, for the most part, ends up with a really good final product, especially in terms of comedy. Like, if you're not enjoying making it, then it's probably not going to be very good. I'm thinking back to like Knocked Up, when Katherine Heigl like ripped the film apart afterwards. It was like, oh, it's anti-feminist and stuff like that. She apparently did not have a good time, but it was an amazing movie. In any event, everything pointed to this, to me, to be a breakout film. And 21.6 million isn't really a breakout film for something like this. Now, it was a low budget, $29 million budget, which is very low for Samuel Jackson, Ryan Reynolds sort of led movie. But I was expecting, based on the marketing, based on the concept on paper, even though it was opening in that August area, kind of the, definitely the tail end, like a weird dip in the box office schedule. Definitely students are going back to college here at Vanderbilt. I think Vanderbilt starts pretty soon. So it's just like a weird downtime for everything. But that being said, I was thinking, okay, like this can probably do, maybe, I was expecting about 30. This is probably like 2 months ago when I was thinking about this. I was thinking like maybe low 30s would be good for this. And like a true breakout would be 40s, 50s, right? And maybe that was me being, way too optimistic or sort of outlandish with my thoughts on Ryan Reynolds and Samuel Jackson in terms of their box office draw. But you can't, Ryan Reynolds, especially with Deadpool, like you can't overlook that. It just seemed like such a good matchup, like such a good pair. And apparently their chemistry is very great on screen. And I think audience reactions to this, first of all, let's walk through what the critics thought. 39% Rotten Tomatoes, so terrible. They hated it. They thought it was just trashy. On Metacritic, of course, I can't find it now. It's like completely gone. It's got to be low, right? So Rotten Tomatoes 39%. The audience basically had a different viewpoint. 76% score on the audience score, which is, this happens sometimes, especially with comedies and maybe some action movies where the audience connects with it a lot more than critics. Critics tend to look at those movies just a little bit differently. On Metacritic, it got a 50% or a 50 score, whatever you want to call it. It's not really a percentage. The audiences seem to connect with it a lot better than critics, but 76 on Rotten Tomato is not great. Cinema score is a B+, which is sort of, that falls in line with that 76, almost 80%. A B+ cinema score essentially says that, hey, people enjoyed it, but they weren't overwhelmed by it. They didn't think it was amazing, but they didn't think it was awful. It's a pretty decent score. That Rotten Tomato score is so bad, 39%. I mean, that's just terrible. But not that surprising considering it's this type of comedy. For whatever reasons, critics just don't give comedies any sort of break. It's like comedy is so specific to someone's personality that I feel like critics, for whatever reason, judge a movie. If they don't laugh, then they think that it's a bad film. But in reality, it may just not be their type of comedy. Right? Like, I've watched 21 Jump Street, and it's like, to me, it was very much an okay film, but it's not like my type of comedy. Same with like Neighbors. But Hot Tub Time Machine, that I give it like 100% because like I would not stop laughing that entire movie. Totally different taste, right? So I think comedy is just a little bit touchier with critics, but audiences seem to like it. It just, for whatever reason, I feel like the marketing dropped off a ton in the last few weeks. And maybe I'm just not in the market or wasn't in the target demographic for this film. But it's like I didn't really see anything marketing wise. I saw a lot more Logan Lucky. Maybe it's because I'm down in Nashville, and Logan Lucky was targeted in more southern, kind of rural-ish areas. But I feel like Hitman's Bodyguard started out with this great marketing campaign, and something happened where they tried to like switch it to a little bit more traditional, and to me it didn't work very well. So that might have something to do with its sort of like, I want to call it kind of a middling performance. Coming into the weekend, 21.6 million, I think people would view it as success, but if you view it in context with the film and who's in it and the concept and the timing, I would expect it well over $25 million for something like this if you sold this to me on paper, right? But that's not the case, and it only did 21.6. But the thing about this is, where's it going to end up, right? Because the audiences sort of liked it, despite the critics ravaging of it, there's nothing coming out until it. And so there's a good 3 weekends here where Hitman's Bodyguard can really kind of cruise. It can go into cruise control and just glide into Labor Day weekend. It's sitting at 21.6 now. You're thinking, man, just because there's not a ton of competition, probably a 3x multiplier on this. Even though the quality suggests like maybe a lower multiplier, I'm thinking probably 3x. So you're probably going to end at like 60 million or something like that. And then I don't know what the international market is for this film. But if you do 60 here in the US, you're going to assume at least 60 internationally, probably like 70, 80. So you're looking at maybe like 130, 140 total take. And with that, very low production budget, that's going to be a profitable film. You're talking probably under $50 million in profit, but definitely above $10 million in profit. So it's definitely going to do more than break even and going to go in the black. But at the same time, I'm a little bit underwhelmed by it. I just feel like that team of Ryan Reynolds and Samuel L. Jackson and the concept of the film, I don't know. I feel like there was a lost opportunity. Like this could have done well over $100 million in the United States. It has so much, it's so wide open now. And maybe, I don't know. I don't know if it could have been a better film or a different kind of marketing. It just didn't hit the home run like I thought it was going to. But we'll keep an eye on that one. I think it's going to stay in first for the foreseeable future. I think all the way through Labor Day weekend. We talked a little bit about number 2, Annabelle Creation. I was suspecting that it was going to do a pretty massive drop. just because in general, horror films have terrible drops. People rush out to see them opening weekend, and then by the time the second weekend rolls around, you're looking at like a 60% drop sometimes. And it gets worse when it's a sequel and the quality may not be fantastic. Those drops tend to be pretty massive. I always look back to like Friday the 13th. I think I had like a 78% drop. And so, it dropped 55%, 56%, which I think is good. Better than I expected. I was thinking high 50s, low 60s. Weekend gross was $15.5 million. Average was about $4,400 per theater. Total take so far is $64 million by its second weekend. That's very surprising to me. I did not think this film was going to do that well. I think the marketing seemed okay. It didn't seem as good as the first Annabelle. I felt like that had a kind of a bigger hook to it, especially the first part of that movie with the whole cult killing, kind of a takeoff of the Manson murders. It felt like it had a really good hook to it, and this one just seemed kind of like, oh, this family lives out in the middle of the country. I think it's in California or something like that. It's kind of like, kind of looks like Oklahoma. And like there's a ghost in the house. It just seems so like I've seen this 1,000 times before, right? It just seemed really boring to me. But audiences seemed to like it. They went out opening weekend and they came back the second weekend in decent numbers. Like a 55% drop is not great for a normal film, but it is pretty good or pretty average for a horror film. So it's not going to sort of dissipate that quickly, and it'll stick around definitely through the Labor Day weekend. So that's number 2. Not much else to say about Animal Creation. I kind of talked about that one a lot last weekend. And number 3, Logan Lucky, $8 million. Estimates were saying, I think 7 to 8. It ended up at 8. I think they're estimating the Sunday. It's going to do pretty well. So this one is the Steven Soderbergh, Channing Tatum, Daniel Craig, Adam Driver heist movie about them robbing NASCAR, essentially, right? And so, or a NASCAR race, and they're basically taking all the money from, I guess, concessions or something like that. I'm really sure. But it's Soderbergh's well-trodden path here of a heist film. He did all those, obviously the Ocean's 11, 12, 13. And so, he's kind of coming back, sticking to his roots, if you will. And, but that's not the interesting part of it, because it sort of sounds like a redneck Ocean's 11, right? And that's kind of what it was marketed as. But what's fascinating about this film is that Soderbergh tried to do something very different here, right? He tried to produce it and market it outside the major studio system. Kind of like in... he's Soderbergh got famous because of Sex, Lies, and Videotapes, at Sundance. Like, he's always been this kind of edgy outsider who made his way into the inside of the movie industry and business. And, he's been able to have one foot in the indie world and one foot in the major studio world. He's been really good with that. And he kind of goes through different phases where he makes an Ocean's movie, then he makes something like the Che movies, like super arty and like super long. And so he's been in that balancing act. This is, I feel like, his attempt to remake the industry a little bit, or at least kind of play with it a little bit and do an experiment to see if you can make a sort of mid-tier movie. It's not indie, right? It's a $29 million film, but it was made outside of that system. And you kind of have to wonder here, not that it's not a terrible failure. $8 million opening weekend is not awful, but it didn't meet tracking, right? Tracking was probably in the low teens. I think it was actually maybe like $15 million. Like that, tracking starts about 3 weeks out. So 3 weeks ago is when they really started this marketing campaign. And it just didn't connect. It didn't connect with audiences for a variety of reasons. And I think that it's a little bit of a failure for Soderbergh and his attempt to make a mid-tier, popular kind of action comedy movie outside of the system. It just did not click. It didn't work. And I was thinking about this morning. I was like, why did Logan Lucky not connect with people? I had thought that this was going to do much better than this. I was thinking 20s. I was thinking it'd be where the Hitman's Bodyguard ended up at, like 21, 22. That was my sort of prediction for this film. And it just didn't get there. And I kind of got to wonder, was it the fact that he tried to do it outside the studio system? Was it just failed or a flawed idea from the start? Like, maybe you can't really be that successful outside of that system for this type of movie. Now, obviously for like an art film or something like that, it's a little bit easier to do it outside the system. You maybe find like a big distributor like Amazon Studios or something like The Big Sick. Or, major studios will pick up indies sometimes under their imprints like Focus or Sony Picture Classics or Fox Searchlight. So that's like definitely a different path. And those are usually arty films. And the expectation is that, if it does anything over $10 million, it's amazing. This was a lot different. The expectation was that it's got to do probably over 50 total domestic. And he basically said in an article with, I want to say it was the Hollywood Reporter. He said basically if it opens at $15 million, I think everybody would be happy. So that's where I got that $15 million tracking number from. And it didn't. And it's going to end up not doing very well. Cinema score was B. So the audiences said it was okay. They didn't love it. What I do find really surprising is this. The Rotten Tomato score was 93%. That is very, very high. That is like the sure sign that it is objectively a good film. If 139 critics reviewed this and 129 of those said it was great, with an average rating of 7.5, which is actually very high, you have an objective barometer of quality there. And so this is, what's funny about this is, Hitman's Bodyguard does a 39% on Rotten Tomatoes, right? But it ends up with an audience score of 73%. Logan Lucky is a 93%, 60% higher critic score. But the audience score isn't that much different. It's at 78% audience score for Logan Lucky, which is almost identical to the Hitman's Bodyguard audience score. So for movies that, one's loved by the critics and the other one is trashed by the critics, they ended up at the same spot with the audience. Which I find that pretty fascinating. Just because it speaks to this disconnect between what critics are thinking and what audiences are thinking, right? It's just like they're on different sides of the coin. I say that because the film, maybe it was marketed to the wrong group of people. In his experiment to do something different, Soderbergh said, we're going to market this only in the last 3 weeks, which is crazy. Movies are marketed for, obviously 6 months in advance sometimes a year in advance. Even like Marvel, sometimes even more if it's like an MCU comic book movie. But in general, the marketing really kicks in about 3 months out and they have a whole cadence. But that marketing for that long cost a ton of money. And when tracking starts 3 weeks out. And what they do in the 3 weeks out is basically measure awareness. And if the awareness is where they want, they're happy, then that's how they determine the rush to the finish line in the last 3 weeks. That's when Logan Lucky really started to market, was at the finish line. I think it might have been the case that they didn't build enough awareness for the film with the right audiences months in advance. So maybe that sort of way of marketing that Soderbergh thought was so interesting and wise maybe just doesn't work. That could be an issue because what I'm seeing is it's a high quality film. The people who saw it didn't like it that much. B cinema score is not great. 78% on Rotten Tomatoes is not fantastic. So there's definitely a disconnect here where the critics who saw it loved it. The audience who saw it didn't. So what's the difference there? Like what does a group of critics or audience of critics have that the group of an average people just don't? And for all intents and purposes, you know, maybe the marketing should have focused on the Northeast or the Midwest or the West instead of just, I know they focused a lot on the South because of the NASCAR theme. Maybe that was a mistake. Maybe this is more of an arty film that would play well on the West Coast and East Coast. You know what I mean? Like, I think they made a lot of assumptions going into the marketing of this film that were incorrect. Because this is the type of movie that I want to see. It's Soderbergh. Well, maybe a lot of people don't know that it's Soderbergh. Maybe that context, they don't have it. But on paper, you have Soderbergh, you have Daniel Craig, you have Adam Driver, and you have Channing Tatum. I fucking his name every time. On paper, it sounds fantastic. On paper, it sounds like Ocean's 11, but with a different cast of characters, with a different sort of take on or perspective on it. Sounds fun. I love Soderbergh. He came out of retirement to do this. Retirement in quotations. So for me, you know, a sort of cosmopolitan film lover, it seems like a good time. So if I went to go see this, I would have a certain set of tools and expectations when I'm seeing it that a critic would probably have. And those are the people that loved it. So I think would really enjoy it. Now, that same set of perspectives and skill sets and lenses that a film critic or a film lover looks through a film with, the average viewer just doesn't have. So maybe this was just a mismarketed kind of arty action film. I almost feel like, and when I saw the trailer, I was like, this feels like a Coen Brothers movie. And Coen Brothers movies are not marketed to like suburbs and exurbs and rural areas. They're marketed to big cities because that's the audience. I feel like if they marketed this more to those, you know, even like New York, Chicago, big city people and urban centers, this wouldn't have been the failure that it was. And it is kind of a failure because, you know, if this was a big studio movie or it was you know, something from Warner Brothers or something like that, you'd say, hey, just like a bad idea. It just didn't work. It didn't connect. You might even call it a flop, but this is kind of worse than a flop because Soderbergh tried to do something different and it failed miserably. It didn't even necessarily fail miserably or flop massively. It's just like the ideas didn't work. So it makes the loss even that much worse. Because now these fat cat studio heads are laughing at Soderbergh saying, see, we know what we're doing. We've been doing this for decades. You try to do it a different way, and this is what's going to happen every single time. Like, you're going to get fucked. And I feel kind of bad, I guess, for Soderbergh. I thought that this was going to work. I read all the articles about it. I was really excited about it because I am interested in film distribution, the film business, and how it works. And Soderbergh has always been somebody who not necessarily likes to throw bombs or whatever. He does like to rock the boat in the film industry, and he always has. But I think that, you know, sometimes he's been right and sometimes he's been wrong. I feel like this time he was going to be right. It turns out that he wasn't. And, you know, you kind of have to look back. Was it Soderbergh's alternative methods for releasing the film and marketing the film that caused it to sort of not do great? Or was it the film itself? I kind of feel like, you know, obviously I feel like the marketing was misdirected and at the wrong group of people. But I also kind of think, despite the fact that I kind of wanted to see it, the idea for the film in general didn't feel very hooky to me. It didn't feel like that necessary. It felt very light and very fluffy. And that would be a fun watch. But that doesn't really get people into the seats. It reminded me a lot of like Burn After Reading, the Coen Brothers movie. It just seemed like a fun romp is essentially what it was, which is kind of what the Ocean movies were all about. But I don't think that, I wish that he would have chosen a different movie to experiment with than this one. I'll put it that way. I kind of feel like this could have been released by a major studio. There's no reason it wouldn't or shouldn't. I kind of wish he had chosen a little bit more of an out there movie. Kind of like, not even like a Contagion, but like maybe I'm trying to think of like one of his more like crazier movies, like I don't even like Side Effects or something like that. Not that was a good film, but something that was a little bit more off the mainstream to experiment with the marketing and stuff like that. And that way, if it doesn't do well, it's like, okay, it was kind of like an arty film and it didn't connect with people in the right way. Here it makes it seem like his methods were just kind of like wrong. And I think that's maybe the wrong takeaway that Soderbergh might have, and maybe the industry might have, about Logan Lucky, is that, well, you have to follow the studio system. Well, I think that's bullshit. The studio system is being upended, every week now with the change in viewing habits. And so, that's why I wanted Logan Lucky to really win, because I felt like it would make studios think about films in a different way, and maybe we wouldn't get a 20th Pirates of the Caribbean movie or the 21st Transformers movie. Maybe they would think about the film industry a little bit different and what products they're creating and how they're marketing those products. But unfortunately, Logan Lucky is not a winner. It will disappear quite rapidly, I would say, even despite the fact there's not a lot of competition. I just don't see it going anywhere. I think anybody who wanted to see this has seen it in the first week or first couple of weeks, and then it's going to disappear pretty quickly there. So Logan Lucky, disappointing third place with $8 million. Number 4 was Dunkirk, a pretty good 38% drop, $6.7 million. Lost about 491 screens. Per theater average was about $2,000. Let's see, it sits at 165 right now. Total take. I know that it's doing very well overseas as well. Did 227 foreign so far, so its total take worldwide is $392 million. You can't complain about that. I mean, that's great. I think domestically, 165 is good. The drops have been fantastic the last few weeks. It's in its 5th weekend. It's going to play well through Labor Day. I don't know. I feel like it's a win. Like going back to the baseball analogies, which are easy and everybody understands. It feels kind of like a standing double. It felt like it was definitely not a home run. It definitely was not a strikeout. Better than a single. It feels like a good mid-tier performance from this film, and I think that's all Christopher Nolan really asked for on this one. I think it felt really much like a passion project for him, like he really wanted to make it, and it was more about like creating a great film about a topic that he was very interested in, and I think he did that, and it's commercially very successful, so a big win for him. Number 5, Nut Job 2, Nutty by Nature, open road films, 5.1 million. A 38% drop, which is decent for it's good for a children's film. We had really good drops this week for whatever reason. I'm not sure why. Maybe people don't have money to go on vacation, so they went to the theater instead. 4,000 theaters. It's still in 4,000 theaters. Wow, that's crazy. That's why its per theater average is so low. It's only about $1,300 per theater. So it's at $17 million so far on a budget of 40. Yeah, I don't know. This is open road films. They just got bought. This felt like this got dumped. And maybe they didn't have a strong marketing campaign, but $17 million is only what it has. And I think it was the worst. I think I mentioned this last week. It was the worst per theater average, I think, or worst opening for a movie over 4,000 theaters. I think that's true. But I don't know. It's like, there's not much to say about it. It's a sequel to a movie that nobody saw. A sequel nobody wanted, from a company that I don't even know if really exists anymore, technically. It got, bought and probably brought into the Chinese company that bought it, so I don't know if it really exists as a separate entity anymore. In any event, so that Nut Job 2 was number 5, still sitting in 4,000 theaters, which is outrageous. That one will disappear rapidly, because if you have a per theater average of $1,300, the theaters are gonna be like, nah, dude, you gotta get out of here with that. I need to open up that space for a movie that actually makes real money. Speaking of terrible movies, number 6 was the Emoji Movie, with a very good 33% drop, which just angers me to no end. 4.35 million. Per theater average is just about $1,500 per theater. Somehow it has lagged its way to $71 million on a $50 million budget. I don't know, man. Like, This movie's just depressing that it's doing. It's not like an outrageous hit, but like the fact that it made $71 million is just, it's stupid. It's stupid that people went to go see this. It's stupid that they keep going to see it. It's not like it's going away. And so, it sucks. Whatever. It's Sony. Sony needed sort of a semi-win. So congrats to Sony on the Emoji Movie for making a horrible train wreck of a film that somehow will get well over $75 million. So whatever, is what it is. It's just one of those things where it's like, it is such a cynical movie to make. And if it was a good film, like people said the same thing about the Lego movie, right? Like, oh, this is just a cash in for the Lego brand, blah, blah, blah. But it ended up being like one of the best films of the year. It was bullshit that I think was it nominated for Best Picture? It should have been. It was such a good movie. It was so funny. And so well written and so tight. So when a movie like that uses an IP, an intellectual property, and it's not just a cash in, and it is a quality film, then you sort of think like, well, okay, like that's okay then. Like that's fine that you use the Lego brand for that. Something like Emoji Movie, it's just like the poor quality suggests that it was just a cash in. And it's just sad to see a movie that has not many redeeming qualities make that much money. It's just one of those, it's part of the business, and it's part of the, it's part of the film industry. That's why they make movies like this, because they can, they're going to make some money off of it. But it's like the artistic side of me that cares about like the qualities of films. It's like this. It's like a nightmare to see that movie do well. Number 7, Spider-Man: Homecoming. Man, apparently it's running a marathon. 29% drop on its 7th weekend. It's now sitting at $314 million. You remember, first, second weekend. The buzz on this was like, is this going to make it to 300? Because it had that terrible second weekend drop. So people were thinking like, I don't think it's going to get to $300 million. But somehow it found its like second, third, and fourth win now. Wins, I should say. And it's really crushing it in these last few weeks. It's kind of amazing to see, to be honest with you, that it is doing this well later in its run. It just goes to show you that, I think people really liked it, especially comic book fans. And maybe it's repeat viewings, or maybe it's, I don't know, maybe there's just like the lack of competition. There's not a ton of great movies out. There's not really anything else like this in the multiplex right now besides, I want to say Wonder Woman, but that's been out for 5 more weeks than Spider-Man. So it kind of has the whole comic book massive blockbuster world to itself, and has for the last 7 weeks. So I think people just kind of like, I want to see a movie like that, so they're going to go see Spider-Man. They also know the character. They know that it's decent because they've seen the reviews and they've seen the word of mouth. And so people just, they want to go to the movies, and so they're going to go see Spider-Man just because it's a known quantity that is good. So that's number 7. Number 8, Girls Trip, with a nice 40% drop. 3.8 million, just below 2,000 per screen. Total take so far on Girls Trip is 103, almost $104 million in its 5th weekend. Girls Trip and Wonder Woman are my stories of the summer, I think. And I'll include Baby Driver in that as well. Just because Girls Trip is, $19 million rated R comedy fronted by like 4 or 5 African-American women. Like, if you look at that on paper, just not even thinking about just like the business and how it works, you're thinking like, oh, the road out, limited release. If I saw that budget, and so the concept, I'd probably say like, oh yeah, if it gets to like $40 million, it'd be like a big win. And it's just like, it's been a huge home run, the whole way through. And I think it's going to best Bad Moms from last year. We'll talk about maybe inflation, but even with inflation, it's going to do well over, I guess 110, 120. If the legs keep sticking in there, you're looking maybe at like $120 million. That's pretty outrageous for a film like this. I think Universal took a bet on it, and they won. And I think that's great. I think it might bring back rated R comedies. It's great to see a film fronted by African-American women break out and do so well. I think that'll lead to more opportunities for films led by African-American women. So I think it's a big win all around and a big story. And we'll see where it goes. Look, it's going to play through Labor Day with no problem. So I think 120 million is going to be easy peasy for it. And so it's probably got maybe plays 5 more weeks in the theaters. Then it's going to kill on VOD and streaming as well. So it's going to be a big money maker for Universal. Number 9, The Dark Tower, Sony, 3.7 million, 52% drop, which is pretty bad, especially when you're looking at the drops from this week, which have been pretty low overall. Lost 308 theaters. Ooh, that per theater average is bad. $1,184 per theater in its third week. Yabba haba. That is not good at all. $41 million is the total take. This is a massive, massive flop for Sony. This was supposed to, start a whole new movie series and all that jazz, and it just did not come through. It's just been, I don't know what. I think it's just a terrible quality film, and it didn't really appease anybody. It didn't appease people who read the books. It didn't appease new viewers. It was a product nobody really liked, and I think nobody really wanted. Well, I mean, that's the case. I think people probably wanted it, right? It's a huge book series, massive, considered Stephen King's best series, I think, amongst the nerds, the book nerds. I think even, especially amongst his fans, the people that I know that love Stephen King are obsessed with the Dark Tower series. So it definitely was a wanted product, but I think the actual product was delivered. Nobody wanted it because it just was just like a total mess, and they had no idea what they were doing with it, and a terrible adaptation of those books. And it's too bad. It's really a huge lost opportunity for everybody involved, especially Sony. This could have been like a 5 movie franchise at the end of the day, and they just, for some reason, they just did not know how to handle this product, this IP. And it's going to go down, I think, as one of, the thing is they kept the production budget pretty low at 60 million. But I think the expectations for this were pretty high, and it's fallen completely way short of those. So that was number 9. Number 10 was Wind River, a movie I actually saw yesterday. It is fantastic. It's kind of got a Western feel to it. It's kind of I don't want to call it a thriller. It's got that really stoic Western feel. Taylor Sheridan, he did Hell or High Water. He wrote that. This is I believe his directorial debut. He also wrote the script. Jeremy Renner, Elizabeth Olsen, John Berthal's in it for a little bit. This one is, Peter Berg produced it. I don't know if I love or hate Peter Berg. I think I hate Peter Berg. He's produced everything over the last 20 years, and he did Battleship and stuff like that. Because he's a big director. He did Patriots Day, which I thought was okay. He did Deepwater Horizon, which I thought was okay. Oh man, I'm getting tired. He just comes across as kind of this guy who, I don't know, he's got this weird chip on his shoulder, and he's been super successful. But I get the feeling that he got in to the industry and has just sort of networked his way to sort of getting all these jobs, which is how it works. But you can, Peter Berg has always been working. He's been working nonstop for the last 20 years. You compare Peter Berg and his work compared to someone like Steven Soderbergh, and they're not even in the same league. Soderbergh is a great director, a great producer, kind of a great artist. I can't say the same for Peter Berg. Peter Berg kind of deals in, I want to say schlocky, mid-tier. He does blockbuster stuff sometimes. I think he did Leftovers, which I absolutely hated. I watched the entire series of Leftovers. Almost that it was a hate watch. It was almost out of spite. I was so angry at the first season because I was oh, this seems like a really cool show. I like all these actors. And I checked it out. I was what is this? And it's not that I don't like weird things or experimental art. That's absolutely not true at all. It's just that it was so poorly written and constructed. Despite the fact that it was obviously prestige TV. I mean, all the production values were off the off the charts. It was very well done in terms of how it was shot and edited and the music. But the writing I thought was just atrocious. And I'm talking to somebody, in my master's in literature. So writing is a pretty important aspect of a film for me, or a TV show in this case. And it just feels like totally something Peter Berg would help produce. It just like, I obviously don't like the guy. Anyways, but he did produce this movie, which is amazing. Very good film. Only on 694 screens, did $3 million. Its per theater average was about $4,360. I don't know where this is going. This felt like an art film. It kind of feels like Hell or High Water. Hell or High Water did break out pretty significantly for kind of an indie flick. I don't know where this one's going to end up. I thought it was strange that they were releasing it in August. It does not feel like an August movie at all. It's very dark, violent, extremely stoic. It's also a wintertime setting, so I don't know. It just did not feel at all like an August doldrum film. This felt like an October, November release to me. I could have seen it in like middle of November. But I cannot argue with the quality of film. It's one of the better films I've seen in a long, long time. I thought it was much better than Hell or High Water, which I enjoyed but didn't think was fantastic. But I don't know. So if you think about the business economics of it, it's on 700 theaters essentially now. Does about $4,400 per theater, which, if you looked at it in isolation, that's a pretty good per theater average. But is it though for 700 theaters? I don't know. I don't know what Weinstein has in store for this film, but I kind of get the impression that it's gonna dry up here. It's gonna sort of go away a lot faster than I think. The other option is that because the quality is so good that they'll keep it at like a low grade burn, which this is what I would do. I wouldn't release it to more than 1,000 theaters. I'd let it sit on, here in Nashville where I saw it. It's like one of the, not arty theaters. It's like a big multiplex that plays some smaller arty films. That's kind of like where I think a good spot for it. It's not necessarily an art house film movie. It's not that out there or abnormal. It's a pretty traditional sort of Western, almost maybe like you'd call it, maybe like a thriller, I guess. I don't really like that term thriller because it doesn't really feel, because thriller to me is like those mid 90s movies that Dimension released, or like VOD, like Body Heat or something like that. Like, and there's always like these weird sexual undertones to everything. It's almost like a Skinamax film, it feels like. That's because when I think thriller, I grew up in the 90s, so that's what I think of. It's not like that at all. It's very naturalistic and stoic. That's why I call it more of a Western. But I would play it at like 1,000 theaters and just sort of let it run its course, get it into people's heads, get it onto VOD by the fall. It's October. Let it run through like September. Get it on VOD in October, November, and then it should be in a good spot for the awards. I don't think it's gonna win Best Picture or anything like that. I don't think it has the cachet. The quality might be there, but I feel like it's not hip enough to win Best Picture. But who knows? I mean, Moonlight won last year, which I thought was, oh my God, I love Moonlight. It's so good. I talked about it a lot in this podcast. I talked about Moonlight like incessantly that last fall when it was coming out. But that movie had a cachet, a coolness, a hipness to it. Basically, like everybody, all the major film societies and critic circles in New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Chicago just adored the film. That's why it won, because it had that groundswell of support to be La La Land. I don't think Wind River's going to have that. I think Wind River's definitely going to get nominated in the original screenplay, and it probably will win. The screenplay was just fantastic, a really wonderful job. But that is the top 10. Outside the top 10, Kidnapped, the weird independent Halle Berry movie that I think was finished 2 years ago. Dropped 44%, did $2.8 million this weekend, almost 2.9. Total take so far is about 25 million bucks. I mean, fantastic. That's unbelievable for a movie like that. That was going to get thrown out on VOD essentially. What else? Glass Castle. I have no idea why they released Glass Castle in August. It makes 0 sense. I thought Wind River didn't make a lot of sense in August, but the Glass Castle makes even less sense just because it's so overtly Oscar bait that, and maybe that's unfair, but the way the trailer was cut, it looks like an Oscar bait movie. It looks like it literally, they're just like baiting every single director and writer in the guild or whatever to vote for this film. It just has that feel to it. So I don't know why they put it out in August. It doesn't make any sense. And it's not doing very well at all. Per theater average is 1745. So it's under the Mendoza line for a movie like this, which is, I would consider $2,000. So it's not, I know it's only on 14, almost 1,500 screens. It's not going to go anywhere. You know, like it's in its second weekend. It's made 9.7 million. I think it's just going to fall off the face of the earth because everybody who's wanted to see this movie, a lot of people read the books or the book. They went to go see it opening weekend. And maybe this weekend. They're not going to, you know, there's not a ton left for the 3rd, 4th, and so on weekends. So, you know, I don't see it doing very well, and kind of puzzled by Lionsgate's strategy when releasing this movie now. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. What else out there? Atomic Blonde. It's going to end up a little bit over 50, it looks like, which is okay. Despicable Me 3, I don't want to talk about that one. War for Planet of the Apes. Wonder Woman, I just don't get it. 24% drop in its 12th weekend. It's now sitting at 404 million. You know, absolutely the winner of the summer, hands down. No one even came close to it. I think also one of the biggest surprises, I think nobody would have guessed that Wonder Woman was going to win this summer. Just no one would have guessed that. Big Sick looks like it's going to tip over about 40 million this week or this next weekend, which is a great showing for that in terms of it being a limited arty film. I thought it had a chance to do a lot more than that. You know, I thought it had a chance to do the train wreck numbers, but it just didn't happen for that one. And then Baby Driver crossed the $100 million mark, which is fantastic for that film. Edgar Wright finally gets a box office win. He's no longer just that cult director who made all those really funny, awesome movies like Scott Pilgrim and Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz. I'm not going to mention The World's End. I hated that movie. No, it was actually okay. That was one of his weaker films, though. So he has a big win, a big box office win. So that means he's going to get a lot more work, or bigger. He's going to get bigger movies, which I think he deserves because he absolutely has the talent to be directing movies with like $100 million budget. He did drop out of Ant-Man, remember, because he had, I think, just disagreements with Marvel and how it was being run. And so he dropped out of Ant-Man. I think that was a big, maybe not a big blow to him, but like it seemed like it was a big blow to his career because that was going to be his big step up. But it turns out he made the right choice. Like Baby Driver was a movie he's wanted to make for a while. He made a music video short that was sort of inspired by the concept in his head, and he followed through with it. And now he has a nice big hit on his hand. You know, $34 million budget. Marketing probably wasn't that high. And it's going to make well over $100 million in the United States. Internationally, it's not, doing gangbusters, 73. So total so far is 175. There's going to be a lot of profit to be made on this. And I think Edgar Wright's going to should be getting a lot bigger movies in the next couple of years. What else is out there? Detroit had a massive 70% drop, just awful. Per theater average was just shy of $600. Like what? Like what's going on with that? Like I saw it. I was honestly pretty massively disappointed by it. I was hyped to see it. This is the Megan Ellison, Annapurna studio. It just, I don't know. There wasn't an audience for it, and I think it was marketed very poorly. And I think they made a very big mistake with the middle portion of the film, which borders on like torture porn. Like it's just really disgusting and uncomfortable to watch. And I get that probably that, Catherine Bigelow, who directed it, wanted it to be that way. But that's a really hard sell in August, to watch something like that. And I don't think there's no audience for it. Clearly it dropped 70% in its fourth weekend. It's only made $15 million, which is not great on a $34 million budget. Same budget as Baby Driver. Detroit's going to end at like less than $20 million, which is what I think Baby Driver did in its open week. So that's a kind of a big, it's not a massive flop because the production budget was so low, but I think it's a really big disappointment for Annapurna Studio and for Catherine Bigelow. I think, I thought it was going to be great. I was not happy with it at all. That is kind of the bigger movies. Some limited stuff that came out this weekend. Ingrid Goes West. This is the Audrey Plaza and the other Elizabeth Olsen movie that is out. Elizabeth Olsen, I must say, not to get into art criticism, I know I'm trying to keep a barrier between art criticism and business on this podcast, but I think Elizabeth Olsen is a great actress. And she was fantastic in Wind River. Very, very good. And from what I can see in Ingrid Goes West, she's also great in this. So she's hitting home runs left and right. In Audrey Plaza, this seemed like the perfect role for her. I can't tell if her character from Parks and Rec is who she is. I feel like she's always playing the same character. And I don't know, it kind of, at first, it's really irritating. But once you get through the, it's like a 12-layer cake of irony, essentially, and ironic detachment and sarcasm. I think once you get through that, there's something there. She certainly has an amazing personality and a great presence on screen. And Ingrid Goes West just seems like an outrageous, almost Spring Breakers-esque film. Very, very, it seems very dark comedy. Performance-wise, it did $438,000 this weekend. It was only on 26 screens. It expanded from super limited release to a little bit bigger. On 26 screens, it did $10,000 per theater. I don't know where it's gonna go. I didn't think this was gonna go anywhere more than probably 100 screens. I don't see why it would. I feel like it's just, I don't know why they're putting it out. Put it out in 1 week in Los Angeles and then put it on Netflix 2 weeks later. So, you can get awards if you want to. All you gotta do is play the movie once in Los Angeles County for 1 weekend, and you're Oscar eligible. I don't know why they didn't just do that for this, and instead that they're trying to like expand it slowly, but it's not gonna go anywhere. $10,000 on 26 screens, or $10,000 per theater on 26 theaters. It's not good enough. It's not good enough to expand anywhere, really. It's not even doing well in those sort of super, super arty theaters. So, it's kind of a dead end. Speaking of dead ends, Good Time, the A24 film. We talked about this one last week as well. When I went on the very strange long rant about how these movies don't belong in theaters at all, which I might continue right now. But Good Time's another example of that. It's on 20 theaters, about $8,650 per theater. Not great. Not good at all. So Ingrid Goes West and Good Time are dead ends. They're art house flicks. They're going to stay in New York and Los Angeles, and if they do expand, they'll die in like a week or two. And that's just the way that these things work. They're not really made for theatrical releases outside of maybe like a handful of cities. It's almost like there's different tiers. Like Ingrid Goes West to me is one of those films that will play great or decently well in Los Angeles, maybe in San Francisco, but probably not. New York is even kind of a stretch. Maybe Miami might be good for it. But it's got like less than 10 cities that's going to play well in and have a good per theater average. Bigger like art films, like let's say The Big Sick, that can play in like a few hundred theaters and do really well. Like big cities that you wouldn't consider like huge cultural centers, like say like Phoenix, or like those big like Dallas, Houston, they certainly have art theaters there. But you kind of wonder like what Ingrid Goes West, how that would play in a place like Dallas, versus a movie like The Big Sick. I mean, they're both technically independent films with smaller budgets, but it's almost like there's two tiers of art films. And Ingrid Goes West seems like it's just like almost too hip and too, I don't even know, too out there, even for bigger city art films or even bigger city like bigger cities like Dallas and Houston like that, where they're not totally different cultures than New York and Los Angeles. Good Time. I don't know what happened with that. I saw the trailer. The trailer looks amazing. It's from A24. I don't know. They just dumped it in August for some reason. It just makes no sense why they're putting this out this way. Maybe they just saw no potential for it. Maybe no words or something like that. But like, they also put out The Most Violent Year, which was great, and Ex Machina. Those didn't really have a ton of awards cachet or whatever behind them. So I don't know. Maybe, and they gave those sort of like more full releases. I remember that I saw a ton of marketing for The Most Violent Year. I saw like nothing for Good Time, absolutely nothing. So maybe it's just not that good of a film. I don't know. But A24, I think, made a pretty big mistake not marketing that more and kind of dumping it here in August. In any event, so that is mostly all the big stories. Let's see, the longest playing major release still in theaters in the top, say, 30 is Guardians of the Galaxy. $389 million. It's still on 195 screens. That's kind of crazy. It's still out there. Definitely the longest running one. Probably the second one would be Wonder Woman, which had it beaten wins the summer. So that's sort of the rundown of this weekend. If I sound a little bit tired, I went on a super, super long hike on Friday. So I'm still, as a mid 30-year-old person, I am still in recovery mode. So I sound kind of loopy. So I apologize for that. Let's talk a little bit about the next week. So next weekend is the 25th of August. You have All Saints coming out. Sony Columbia is a distributor, 800 screens, or theaters, I should say. I have no idea what that's about. Birth of the Dragon, Blumhouse Tilt, gets that like Blumhouse's imprint. 1,500 theaters. And then Leap, an animation movie from Weinstein, 2000. None of those are really major releases. They all seem kind of like, if not indie, just like super small films from major studios. So, I don't know what's going to do. Neon, who put out, Neon is the distributor that put out Ingrid Goes West. They have a new one coming out called Beach Rats. I don't even know what their deal is because they're kind of a brand new distributor. Someone to keep an eye on. Good Time is expanding nationwide this weekend. I don't know what the point of that is. It's gonna have a terrible per theater average. And then the only other wide movie before the big It weekend of September 8th, I like how I'm talking about it like it's Christmas, because it is. It really is going to be amazing. I'm expecting it's going to do like 70, 80 million, I think. That's sort of my guess right now. Tulip Fever, which is about Amsterdam, I want to say, in the 1700s, maybe 1600s. I saw the trailer on the Wind River, before Wind River. So it looks like a total mess. It looks like an art film. I don't know why it's being released wide. I don't know what Weinstein's doing. It probably was a really big book, it sounds like. But Tulip Fever is going to go nowhere. It just makes no sense why there's no place for movies like this anymore. Maybe a limited release, maybe in the fall, like I'm thinking October, November, but now in like the week everybody's like back to school and back at work, literally no one's going to see that unless they love the book so much they're going to go out of the way to see the movie. I think it's going to, I don't know how many screens it's going to be on, but it's going to be, I think, a pretty big flop overall. And that ends August, and then you get into September. Home Again, Open Road Films, I guess they're still functioning in the studio. I don't really know what's going on with them. That's with Reese Witherspoon. She plays kind of an older woman who's dating a younger man. That has the potential to break out. There's a 9/11 movie coming out with Charlie Sheen and Whoopi Goldberg and Gina Gershon. I don't know anything about that. It's from Atlas Distribution. Honestly, it sounds like a complete train wreck, and I don't even want to think about it. Charlie Sheen in a 9/11 movie. I mean, who thought that was going to be a good idea? And then, of course, it comes out September 8th. And I think it's going to blow everything out of the water. I think it's going to blow all the September records. I think the biggest opening in September before was like, let's say $50 million. I think it's going to crush that. I'm thinking, if everything lines up the way I think it's going to, I would say 60 is probably the floor, and like the sky's the limit. It could go over 100. It really could. It just there's just this palpable feeling in the air with this movie. Everybody wants to see it. And then September, opens up then. You got Assassin or American Assassin on the 15th. You have Mother, the Darren Aronofsky horror film with Jennifer Lawrence on the 15th as well. And you got Kingsman. You got the Ninja Lego movie the next weekend, and it's just like boom, 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 flatliners to end the month. And American Made, I'm not really sure what that one is about. Oh, that's the Tom Cruise movie. That looks like a flop. American Made reminds me of that Gold movie with Matthew McConaughey that came out oddly came out at the end of the year, and like nobody knew it was coming out, and just sort of like was in the theaters and then it was gone. That's what American Made feels like. It also feels like a complete ripoff of Narcos, the Netflix highly successful TV series. That's all I got, man. That's it. So I will be back next week to talk about this next weekend, which should be super boring. You know what? I might throw an audible here. It's because the next 2 weekends, there's not going to be a ton to talk about. Maybe talk about some of the holdovers a little bit. I might do like a fall movie preview. Yeah, that sounds fun. Maybe even like a holiday movie preview. Maybe we'll talk about the rest of the year. That could be fun. Anyway, thanks for listening, guys. I'll be back next week. Have a good one.